I've been in love with my sister's best friend for months, and I never planned for it to happen. It just did. Slowly. Quietly. In all the ways that make it impossible to stop once you realize what's going on. I've been living with my older sister Mia since I graduated from college. She has this 2-bedroom apartment near downtown and offered me the spare room while I figured out my career. Living with Mia was easy. She's one of those people who makes life smoother just by existing. She volunteers at the animal shelter on weekends, brings home leftover baked goods from her office, and never gets annoyed when I forget things like buying toilet paper or taking the trash out. Growing up, she was always the responsible one. I was the one still trying to catch up. The problem wasn't Mia. The problem was Luke. Luke entered our lives about 3 years ago, when he and Mia met at a work conference and became instant friends. At first I barely noticed him. He was just one of her work buddies who came over for wine nights and reality TV marathons. He laughed easily, talked a lot, and blended into the background of our lives without making waves. Then I started noticing things. Luke fixed our garbage disposal without being asked. He remembered that I was lactose intolerant, and showed up with oat milk lattes, instead of regular ones. He laughed at my dumb jokes like they were actually funny, not polite smile funny. When he listened, he didn't just wait for his turn to talk. He actually paid attention. Somewhere between those moments, I fell for him. The worst part was that I was almost certain Luke was in love with Mia. He texted her good morning every single day. Not occasionally, not when he remembered, every day. He drove 40 minutes to bring her soup when she had a cold. He memorized her coffee order and her work schedule. When Mia talked, Luke watched her like she was explaining the meaning of life instead of complaining about emails or coworkers. Mia was completely oblivious. She'd come home and tell me how lucky she was to have such a good friend. She once tried to set Luke up with a coworker, and when he made up an excuse about focusing on his career, she just shrugged and said he was too picky. I died a little every time. For months, I tortured myself watching them together. Luke would come over for dinner and sit next to Mia on the couch while I took the armchair like a background character. He'd help her cook while I set the table. They had inside jokes from work that I didn't understand. References that made me feel like I was standing outside a room with the door closed. The holidays were worse. Luke spent Thanksgiving with us because his family lived across the country. He brought flowers for Mia and helped her cook the turkey. I made mashed potatoes alone in the corner like a sad ghost. After dinner, he stayed until midnight helping her clean up while I pretended to be tired and went to bed early. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to them laugh in the kitchen, wondering how something could hurt so much without anyone doing anything wrong. The breaking point came one Friday night. Mia went on a date with a guy from her gym. Luke showed up at our apartment even though he knew she was out. He claimed he'd left his charger there, which was obvious nonsense because I'd seen it in his car earlier that week. He stayed anyway. We watched a movie together, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like there was an invisible line between us. The whole time he kept checking his phone, asking when Mia would be back. When she finally texted that she was staying over at the guy's place, Luke stood up immediately and said he should head out. That's when something inside me snapped. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep being the quiet observer in my own life, watching the person I loved love someone else who didn't even realize it was happening. The next week, I made a decision. Not a dramatic one, not a reckless one. Just a small, deliberate shift. Every time Luke came over, I made sure I was already in the living room. When he sat down, I sat next to him. Not too close, just normal friend distance. When Mia cooked, I helped while Luke sat at the table. I started texting him memes during the day. Nothing flirty, just things I knew he'd find funny. He always responded. I found out there was one TV show Mia hated but Luke loved. So, I started watching it. I texted him about each episode. Soon, we had our own inside jokes. When Luke came over, he started bringing 2 oat milk lattes instead of 1. He asked about my job interviews and remembered details I didn't even remember sharing. And still, he texted Mia first every morning. Still, he sat next to her at dinner. I told myself I wasn't crossing a line. I was just existing louder, but deep down, I knew what I was doing. And once I started, I didn't know how to stop. Once I started paying attention to Luke, it became impossible not to notice how easily he fit into our lives. He wasn't loud or demanding. He just showed up. And that was exactly what made it hurt so much to want him and know I couldn't have him. I kept telling myself my new behavior was harmless. I wasn't flirting. I wasn't confessing feelings. I wasn't sabotaging anything directly. I was just being present in ways I hadn't been before. But presence has weight. and I could feel it shifting something between us. Luke started noticing me too. At first, it was small things. He'd ask how my job search was going, and actually wait for the answer instead of nodding politely. He remembered which companies I'd applied to and followed up days later. When he came over, he'd look for me first before settling in next to Mia. It wasn't obvious enough for anyone else to comment on, but I felt it. The texting became a routine. I'd send him a meme during lunch, and he'd respond within minutes. Not with a single emoji, but with something that kept the conversation going. Sometimes he'd send one back later, unprompted, like he'd seen something and thought of me. That alone made my heart do stupid things. The show we watched together became ours without either of us saying it out loud. Mia hated it, so she'd leave the room when it was on. Luke and I would sit on the couch, close but not touching, reacting to the same scenes, laughing at the same dumb moments. We started referencing it in texts, quoting lines back and forth like a shared language. I told myself this was what friendship looked like. Then Thanksgiving happened. Luke spent the holiday with us because his family lived across the country. He showed up with flowers for Mia and wine for dinner. He helped her cook, standing next to her at the counter while I peeled potatoes alone. I kept my head down, focusing on my task like it might save me from feeling invisible. After dinner, Mia went to take a call from a coworker. Luke stayed behind to help clean up. For the first time, it was just the two of us in the kitchen. He handed me a plate to dry, and thanked me for cooking. He said the mashed potatoes were his favorite part of the meal. No one had ever told me that before. It was such a small thing, but I carried it with me for days. Mia didn't notice the shift. Or if she did, she didn't interpret it the way I feared. She kept telling me how lucky she was to have Luke in her life. She joked about how he was basically her emotional support human. Once, she even asked if I thought he'd ever settle down with someone. I lied and said I didn't know. The night she went on a date with the guy from her gym, Luke showed up at our place, even though he knew she wouldn't be there. He said he needed to grab his charger, but instead of leaving, he stayed. We watched a movie together, sitting far enough apart that it felt intentional. He kept checking his phone, waiting for Mia's updates. When she texted that she wasn't coming home, he left immediately. I smiled and waved, like it didn't hurt. After that night, I stopped pretending I didn't care. I positioned myself closer, physically and emotionally. When Luke came over, I claimed the couch first. When Mia cooked, I helped her, leaving Luke alone at the table. I asked Luke questions about his work, his family, things Mia never asked because she already knew the surface version of him. He started opening up. He told me about his childhood in Oregon, about growing up with brothers who were louder and more confident than him, about feeling invisible sometimes even as an adult. I listened in a way I hadn't listened to anyone before, because every word felt like a gift. Slowly, things changed. Luke started bringing 2 oat milk lattes instead of 1. He fixed my laptop when it crashed and refused to let me pay him. He asked about my interviews and remembered the dates. He still sat next to Mia at dinner. He still texted her good morning first. That part didn't change. The jealousy surprised me. I hadn't expected to feel angry with Mia. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was just existing the way she always had, kind, oblivious, generous. But watching Luke's attention split between us made something ugly twist in my chest. I hated that feeling. Hated myself for it. Then came Mia's birthday party. She invited a group of friends to a bar downtown. Luke hovered around her all night, buying her drinks, making sure she didn't lose her purse, taking pictures of her laughing with friends. I watched from across the bar, nursing vodka tonics and telling myself I deserved whatever I was feeling. At some point, Mia started talking loudly about how Luke was too good to be single. She grabbed our friend Hannah and tried to set them up. Luke smiled politely, but his jaw tightened. I watched him retreat inside himself the way he always did when Mia dated someone else. I pulled him outside for air. That's when everything finally cracked open. The air outside the bar was cold enough to sting my lungs, but I welcomed it. Inside, the music was too loud, the laughter too sharp, and watching Luke trail after Mia all night had finally pushed me past pretending I was fine. Luke leaned against the brick wall, rubbing his face like he was exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The sounds from inside were muffled out here, like the world had shrunk down to just the two of us standing under a flickering light. I asked if he was okay. That was all it took. He laughed once, short and bitter, and said no. He said he hadn't been okay for a long time. The words came out fast after that, like he'd been holding them in for years and didn't know how to stop now that they were loose. He told me he'd been in love with Mia for 3 years. Not a crush. Not a what if. Love. The kind that changes how you organize your life. The kind where you wake up thinking about someone and go to sleep wondering what you did wrong that day. He said he did everything right. He showed up. He listened. He was dependable. He was patient. He waited while she dated other guys, convinced himself that if he just stayed close enough, she'd eventually see him the way he saw her. She never did, he said quietly. She just never did. He told me watching her go on dates felt like being slowly erased. Like he was standing right there and still invisible. He said he felt stupid for hoping for so long, but also terrified of letting go because then what was all of it for? I didn't interrupt. I didn't comfort him. I just listened, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Then he said my name. He said spending time with me had been the only thing keeping him sane lately. He said our texts were the best part of his day. That when he laughed with me, it didn't feel forced. That I actually got him in a way he didn't have to explain. That part scared me more than everything else. Before I could respond, the bar door swung open. Mia stepped outside, cheeks flushed, smiling like she'd just had the best night of her life. She wrapped her arms around Luke and me both, and said how happy she was that her two favorite people were getting along so well. Luke froze. I felt something in me harden, and that's when I made the decision that changed everything. I told Mia that Luke had something important to tell her. Luke's face drained of color. He looked at me like I'd just shoved him off a cliff. Mia immediately went into best friend mode, grabbing his hands and asking what was wrong, if he was okay, if someone hurt him. He tried to speak. He couldn't. So I helped. I told her Luke had feelings for someone at the party and didn't know what to do about it. Mia's eyes lit up instantly. She started guessing names, rattling off women she knew, laughing and teasing like this was fun. Luke shook his head at every guess. When she jokingly said my name, everything stopped. The silence was so heavy it felt physical. Mia stared at Luke. Luke stared at the ground. I stared at the crack in the pavement like it might open and swallow me whole. Then Mia laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly. Just surprised, delighted laughter. She said she'd known it. She said she'd noticed the looks, the closeness, the way we gravitated toward each other. She said she'd been trying to give us space to figure it out ourselves. My stomach dropped. She had no idea. She genuinely believed Luke's feelings had always been about me. She hugged us both, squeezing tight, saying she was so happy for us, that she'd been waiting forever for us to stop being idiots. She dragged us back inside like she was unveiling a surprise party. And I let her. Inside, people cheered. Someone ordered shots. Hannah hugged me. Someone took pictures. Luke put his arm around my shoulders because everyone was watching. But his body was stiff, like he didn't know where he was supposed to be. He leaned down and whispered that we needed to talk. I followed him into the hallway near the bathrooms, where the music faded into a dull thump. He asked what just happened. He asked if I planned this. The accusation hurt because it wasn't entirely wrong. I told him I didn't know Mia thought that. That I never meant for it to come out like this. And that part was true. But I also admitted that I didn't stop it. That some part of me had wanted this outcome, even if I hadn't imagined it would happen so brutally. I told him the truth Mia didn't know. That she never knew he loved her. That she thought everything he did was just friendship. That correcting her now would hurt everyone involved. Luke leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing hard. He said he didn't know what he felt anymore. That the last few weeks with me had felt good. Real. Easy. But he didn't know if that meant something meaningful, or if he was just desperate to be wanted back. He said we needed time. That we'd talk tomorrow when we were sober. Then he walked away. I stood there alone in the hallway, listening to the party continue like nothing had happened, realizing I'd gotten everything I wanted in the worst way possible. And I had no idea what it was going to cost me yet. The next morning felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The apartment smelled like bacon and coffee, the kind of smell that usually meant comfort and routine. Instead, it made my stomach twist. Mia was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes like it was a celebration. She was humming, smiling too much, moving around with this excited energy that made it impossible to forget what she thought had happened the night before. She looked at me like I'd just unlocked some secret level in life. Luke sat at the table with a mug of coffee, staring into it like it might offer answers. He looked exhausted, not hungover tired, emotionally wrecked tired. When our eyes met, he looked away almost immediately. Mia kept talking, about how cute we were, about how she'd known all along, about how she wanted details, timelines, plans. I answered vaguely, saying we were taking things slow. Luke didn't contradict me, but he didn't smile either. My phone buzzed. A text from Luke. even though he was sitting 10 feet away. "Can we talk later?" "Just us." I nodded slightly and put my phone away. Luke left soon after breakfast, claiming errands. Mia watched him go with a proud smile, then turned to me and said she was so happy everything worked out. I hugged her and felt like I was holding something fragile I'd already cracked. That afternoon, when Mia left for her volunteer shift, Luke came back. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the same couch where he used to sit next to my sister while I pretended not to care. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Luke finally spoke. He said he hadn't slept, that he'd spent the whole night thinking about the last 3 years of his life, and how stupid he felt for chasing someone who never wanted him back the same way. He said being around Mia had always felt like auditioning for a role he never got cast in. Then he talked about me. He said being with me felt different, easier, like he didn't have to perform. He said our conversations didn't leave him feeling small or invisible. He said when he laughed with me, it felt real instead of hopeful. I asked the question I'd been dreading. I asked if he was choosing me because he actually wanted me, or because I was there. He didn't dodge it. He said he didn't know for sure. He said, feelings were messy, and sometimes you didn't understand them until you were already standing in the middle of the consequences. He said he wanted to try, to see what something real with me could be, without pretending the past didn't exist. I should have told him everything then. I should have confessed how deliberately I'd placed myself closer. How I'd picked his favorite show on purpose. How I'd pushed him toward that confession at the bar, knowing it could explode. But I didn't. I said yes. We kissed, soft and cautious, like both of us were afraid of breaking something. When he left an hour later, I sat alone on the couch wondering if wanting something badly enough justified how you got it. The next few weeks were strange. Mia was thrilled. She kept checking in, asking how things were going, making comments about how perfect we looked together. Her happiness made the guilt worse, not better. Every time she smiled at me like I'd done something good, it felt like a lie sitting heavy in my chest. Luke and I started dating for real. Dinners, movies, walks downtown. From the outside, it looked natural, but there were moments that made my stomach knot. He still texted Mia sometimes. Not as often, but enough that I noticed. He still helped her without being asked. Still laughed at their old inside jokes. I knew it was normal. I knew they were friends. But knowing didn't stop the jealousy. I hated that version of myself. The guilt twisted into something uglier. I'd wanted him. I'd worked for his attention. And now that I had it, I felt threatened by the very friendship I'd built this on. Then Mia started dating someone seriously. She came home glowing, talking about EA like she'd discovered something life-changing. She was distracted, busy, happy. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt ashamed for being relieved. One night, Luke canceled our dinner plans. He said Mia needed help moving furniture for a surprise she was planning for EA. I stared at my phone, feeling that old familiar ache. When I heard his voice in the living room laughing with her later that night, something snapped. I confronted him. I accused him of always choosing her. He got defensive. He said Mia was his best friend and always would be. He said he couldn't believe we were having this argument. He left without kissing me goodbye. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I apologized. I admitted I was jealous and that it wasn't fair. He listened quietly, then told me something that stuck. He said if he was still in love with Mia, he would have avoided the conversation entirely. He said staying and talking, choosing discomfort instead of escape, was the difference. I wanted to believe him. Things eased after that. I got busy with job interviews. Luke gave me space. The distance helped. When we saw each other again, it felt lighter, more real, less charged. But the guilt never fully left. Because no matter how normal things looked now, I knew the truth underneath it all. And I knew that if it ever came out the wrong way, I wouldn't just lose a boyfriend. I'd lose my sister too. 6 months passed, and life settled into something that almost felt normal. Luke and I argued about groceries, laughed over dumb inside jokes, and spent lazy Sundays doing absolutely nothing. He left his socks on my bathroom floor. I stole the blankets when he slept over. We knew each other's coffee orders without asking. From the outside, it looked like a healthy, boring, real relationship. And most days, it was. But guilt doesn't disappear just because life moves on. It waits quietly for moments when everything else goes still. Sometimes it hit me while we were folding laundry. Sometimes while grocery shopping. And sometimes while watching Luke laugh at something I said. That familiar thought would slip in uninvited. You didn't get here cleanly. I had wanted Luke long before he wanted me. I had nudged situations. I had stayed silent when speaking up would have changed everything. And worst of all, Mia still didn't know the full truth. She was happy. Truly happy. She loved EA, and was building a future with him. She talked about moving in together, about long-term plans, about how good it felt to finally be chosen without question. Every time she smiled at me and said how glad she was that Luke and I found each other, my chest tightened. Because telling her now wouldn't heal anything. It wouldn't undo Luke's years of unreturned love. It wouldn't change where we were now. It would only hurt her. And knowing that didn't make me feel better. It made me feel responsible. Luke noticed the weight before I admitted it. One night, while we were sitting on my couch in comfortable silence, he asked if I still felt guilty about how we started. Not accusing. Not defensive. Just honest. I didn't lie. I told him I felt like I'd cheated the universe. That I worried I'd built something good on something broken. That sometimes I was scared I didn't deserve how steady he was with me. He listened without interrupting, then told me something I didn't expect. He said he didn't think love was some pure, untouched thing that only came from perfect beginnings. He said most real relationships were messy and imperfect, and built by people who made questionable choices before they learned how to be better. Then he said this: "If I thought you manipulated me into loving you, I wouldn't be here. I chose this. I choose you." That didn't erase the guilt, but it changed its shape. Around the same time, Mia told me she and EA were officially moving in together. She said it casually over breakfast, like it wasn't a massive shift. I smiled, congratulated her, and then locked myself in the bathroom afterward to breathe. Living with her had been my safety net, but more than that, she was the person I was most afraid of disappointing. That night, lying awake in bed, I seriously considered telling her everything. Every half-truth. Every silent decision. Every moment I chose myself over honesty. But then I pictured her face. Not angry. Not betrayed. Just hurt and confused over something she didn't even know had existed. And I realized something uncomfortable but true. Confessing now wouldn't be brave. It would be selfish. I wasn't protecting her from the truth to save myself. I was protecting her because the truth no longer served anyone but my guilt. That didn't mean I got to forget it. It meant I had to live better. So I did the only thing I could. I stopped competing with a past that didn't exist anymore. I stopped watching Luke's interactions with Mia like they were a threat. I stopped testing him, stopped counting who he texted first, stopped comparing myself to a version of her that lived only in his memories. And slowly, genuinely, things changed. Luke didn't talk about Mia the way he used to. Not because I asked, because he didn't need to. Their friendship stayed, but the weight of expectation disappeared. I wasn't replacing her. I was something different. Then my life shifted in ways that had nothing to do with Luke at all. I got a job offer I'd been chasing since graduation. A real start. My own money. My own space. Signing that lease felt like stepping into adulthood for the first time without leaning on anyone else. Luke helped me move. So did friends from work. Mia hugged me and told me how proud she was. And for once, the words didn't sting. One night, months later, Luke and I sat on my balcony watching the city lights. He reached for my hand and told me he loved me. Not dramatically, not urgently, just quietly certain. And I believed him. I still think about that night at the bar sometimes. About how easily everything could have gone differently. About how love isn't always won by grand gestures, but by small choices made again and again, some good, some selfish, some human. I didn't get the love story I imagined. I got something messier. Something honest in the end, even if it didn't start that way. And I've learned this. Love doesn't require perfect beginnings, but it does demand accountability for how you got there. I can't rewrite the past. I can only choose who I am now. And now, I choose to be better.